Hello and welcome to News 24. My name is Tshidi Madia, part of the politics desk here at News 24. We're coming to you live with the newly elected interim leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, who's in studio with us here at Media Park. Hello, John. Welcome to News 24.
Thank you, Tshidi. It's great to be with you and great to be with the News 24 team and, of course, all those people who are watching.
You know, yesterday at the Nkululeko House, where you were elected interim leader, I listened to you and I took from what you were saying about, about who you want to be as a leader. I took, okay, in a nutshell, John's saying to us, he wants to be compassionate, he wants to show empathy in his leadership, and of course, this big fight back against poverty. Yes. Just help us understand, because now you are also speaking to me as a member of the electorate. Just help us understand what that encompasses. How does that happen? Sure. How do you connect to us as electorate as that compassionate leader?
Well, I think that it's important that leaders realize that they are servants of the public and not the other way around, and that to do so we've got to serve with honesty and serve with compassion, particularly in a situation like we have in South Africa. We have so much dispossession, so much exclusion, and so many people outside of opportunity in the country that are actually living in abject poverty, and their cause has to be our concern every single day as leaders, and that we shouldn't be doing anything other than standing up in the morning and say, what are we doing today to make life better for those millions of South Africans who 25 years after apartheid still remain locked out of opportunity. The large majority, 99.9% of them, happen to be black South Africans. And what can we do today to lift more people out of poverty and into opportunity? And I think if we target poverty in the country, we're going to be able to start to focus redress where it's required most. And that is where I want the DA to be. I want us to be compassionate where we are in opposition, and I want us to be especially compassionate where we govern, so that people know the DA difference, and that these are people not just talking for themselves, not just squabbling amongst themselves, but actually have my concerns as their primary care and are raising those issues every single day. And that's the party I want us to be.
You've touched on a number of issues that I think are worth exploring, one being the state of the organization. I'll come to that a little bit later. Let's speak about the issues of redress. Let's just jump right into it.
Sure.
How does that actually happen? How does the DA tangibly address the issue of redress? How do you practically fight this poverty?
Sure. Well, I think that one looks at redress as the concept, and I think you look at the brands of redress. The ANC have brands of redress. They're called BEE and affirmative action. And 25 years later, I think we can all agree that they haven't worked. They're not broad-based. They're not empowering. And they've created a small elite who keep being empowered, while the majority of South Africans remain locked out of opportunity, who languish in poverty and squalor with very little hope for building a future for themselves. We come from the point as a Liberal Democratic Party that the touchstone of value in South Africa is the individual. But it is impossible for an individual to advance their value if they are homeless, if they are hungry, if they're without work. And so those have to be our concern. So in a country like South Africa, which has centuries of oppression, repression and dispossession, we have to have redress policies, but we must make sure that those redress policies target the people who need them the most. And we believe that poverty and people in poverty are easy to define, and it makes it far easier as policymakers to target your policies at them. I think the ANC's brand of redress has not worked and has targeted a very small elite who've got very, very wealthy and has created an environment where there's I think an unholy compact between big business and the ANC policy regime. And I think the system is loaded against those who still remain on the outside of the economy. We need to make sure we are focusing policies that actively address poor people in South Africa, lifting them out of poverty and into opportunity.
Then how does the DA reconcile? I mean, you haven't gone to your policy conference yet, so you haven't sharpened your policies. As you and I speaking now, my understanding of the DA's policies are what you offered to voters in the lead up to the 2019 elections. And the offering that the DA put there had actually issues around triple BEE. Some arguing that it's almost a more cleaned up version of what the ANC is doing, but actually what the ANC is doing. So then how do you reconcile what you're saying about triple BEE and the likes with what the DA has done and offered the actual electorate in the 2019 elections?
Well, I think that it's very clear that what we offered the electorate did not gain significant traction. In fact, I think it's the reason why we went backwards, because we've slipstreamed in the ANC's image of redress rather than defining our own brand of redress going forward. And so all we offered, I think, in the last election is a better version of ANC policies. I think that given the abject failure, and the statistics released last week show us that inequality is widening, poverty is growing, whereas in other parts of the world it's narrowing. So clearly those policies are not working. We need to reinvent redress and our brand of redress in our own image, not just trying to tinker around the edges of what the ANC are doing and critiquing ANC policies, but coming up with our own bold, exciting new offers and ideas. And that's what I hope the policy conference is going to produce, is our own stall, which we're able to put before the electorate. And I think if we do that, we'll be able to organically attract far more people who say, hey, I actually am with these guys. I like what they're saying. This is something new. What I've been experiencing has not worked for me. I'm going to give these guys an opportunity to have my vote and see what they can do with it. And I think that if we can do that, I think we'll be able to not only regain some of the support we lost, but I think we'll be able to speak to people who've never trusted the DA before and who've never given us their vote before. And that's going to be required if the party is to grow. We don't want to stay in opposition forever. The goal of any party is to get into power. And so to do that, we need to grow. We need to grow in all communities.
John, you speak about how you don't want to be tinkering on ANC policies, but you're not just a new leader, being the interim leader. You're part of that leadership collective period back then. You were part of Team 1SA. You were going out and selling this to South Africans. Did you ever internally even raise a hand and say, hold on, we are moving in the wrong direction. We cannot be sending voters this message. We will not succeed at the polls. Did you actually take a stand?
Yes, of course I did. And I went back on many occasions during the course of the campaign and said, look, people aren't buying what we're selling out there. They're not buying the ice cream. It's not working. It's not gaining traction. But of course we were kept being told that the polls are proving otherwise, and that we're up in the polls, and that these issues around immigration and the like were a huge vote winners. Well, go figure. The party that argued for open borders actually grew in this election. The party pushing for closed borders and I think adopting in some instances an unfortunate stance actually lost votes. I think that I spoke out very strongly about the party's approach to the election, particularly of the president. I think the DA completely misjudged the mood of the country. And I think that they got the messaging wrong around that. And that's something I was vociferous about. But of course, when you're part of an election team, your job is to go out there and sell it. My job was to put out our offer on safety and security. And I think that we put out a very clear alternative about a reinvention of how policing is done in the country. And I'm very proud of the offer we made there, which I believe was far more in our own image and not simply following the slipstream of tinkering around the edges of fixing the SAPS, but completely overhauling the way policing is done in the country. And I think that's what we've got to do more. But of course, I was part of the leadership, and we've had to introspect, and there's had to be introspection done. And I think it's been done through the report that was there. And part of the report's outcome, you would notice one of the sections was a conflict between the key leadership team. And yes, I'm being too honest with you, there was some conflict between me and particularly the CEO of the party at the time around some of these very issues around the campaign. I just felt as a politician who was on the ground, getting feedback from the communities, that our message wasn't resonating. And eventually it was the polls that were proven wrong, and the instincts of the politicians that were proven right.
The DA and the IRR's polls that were proven wrong, not every other poll. John, the issue of the president, you just quickly touched on the president and how the DA misread the mood. Are you referring to President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa?
Yes, I'm referring to the President of the country.
So in essence what you're saying is what Mmusi did, what Mmusi led, the charge against Cyril Ramaphosa, not only in Parliament about the donations made to his internal campaign in the ANC, but also going to the public protector. Are you saying that was wrong?
No, I'm talking about the election of the president, and I think that a very mean-spirited statement that went out upon his election. I think that it misjudged the mood of the country because people were just so relieved to see the back of Zuma, and so relieved that there was a sense that the country was going to move forward again. And I described it as a shipwreck where somebody's hanging on to a piece of wreckage. And what they don't want is you coming along and saying, that's a terrible piece of wreckage, this is all they had at the time. And I said, our time will come with Ramaphosa down the line. And it's proven correct. We're starting to see that the new dawn has become the new yawn. And there's very little process and concrete action that's been taken, and many of the key protagonists of state capture will make a comeback. Just this last week, we've seen the comeback of Batabile Dlamini, and you're not going to solve the problems with the same people who created them sitting around the table still.
I want to go into, because we started talking about
Sure.
the leadership of the DA, I'm going to have to delve into Mmusi Maimane.
Sure.
On Sunday, you know, you're quite very deliberate in communicating how, to you, in your eyes, you did not stab Mmusi Maimane in the back, and that, you know, you did support him as best as you could. But what I'm not hearing in the DA is the DA in itself take responsibility. There's a lot of finger pointing that's happening as far as how the DA got to where it is. You were also there in 2014 when Mmusi was elected. There are a lot of conversations around whether or not that was the right leader. You know, I remember hearing Professor Somato Tafikeni in ENCA speak about how the DA is a program of microwaving young black leaders before they're even ready and getting them to the top. I don't hear the DA in its reflections taking responsibility of how it got here. We are pointing fingers, a lot of fingers being pointed at a leader who's now stepped down and actually left the party.
Well, look, I think that it was the right choice at the time. There was significant pressure from within the party, from without the party, in the commentariat, amongst donors, that if the DA wants to succeed in South Africa and grow its support, that it required a black leader at the helm. I happen to felt that Mmusi was a compelling choice then, particularly given the juxtaposition with someone like Zuma. Here you have this young, dynamic, energetic leader who projected and lived the image of one South Africa for all. And I think that's why, you know, he was successful at that Congress. That was why he was re-elected unopposed. But the problem is we had an election where there was a setback. And I'm not for one instant here saying Mmusi was responsible for everything that went wrong. I think Mmusi took bad advice from some people. I think that the operation let Mmusi down in some instances. But unfortunately, with elections, the buck always stops with the leader. And it's not something unique to South Africa. If you look at political parties the world over, where there is a setback, leaders put their hand up and say, look, I think I'm going to step aside. And you've seen it with David Cameron, you've seen it with Ed Miliband, you've seen it with John Major and others. When you have a result like that, there is some responsibility on behalf of the leader. And that's not to say that everything that went wrong was Mmusi's fault. Not at all. But that is where the buck stops in a political party, unfortunately. And so the leader has to take some responsibility on behalf of the organization to do so. And I think Mmusi did do that. I don't think it was necessary for him to resign. I don't think he should not have continued on. I don't think he needed to leave the DA, even if he chose not to contest the next Congress, which was never a requirement that he not contest it. I think that he could have stayed on and played a role in the party, and I was one of the people who counseled him to stay on and to not resign and to wait till after the Federal Council to make these decisions. But at the end of the day, these are personal choices that people make, and you've got to respect them. I don't think it was the right choice, but it wasn't my choice to make.
Are you concerned at all amidst the rumors that he might be starting a party political platform or something and maybe take some dip of supporters on the DA? Are you concerned at all that a Mmusi comeback in the world of politics, and not just Mmusi, because you might have Mmusi on the one hand and others could argue actually Lindiwe Mazibuko must also make a comeback. You've got these black faces that have been put to at the top of the party who've left the party. Are you worried at all that there might be some sort of a comeback that the DA has to deal with?
No, I think we operate in a competitive political environment already. There's 13 political parties in Parliament. There were over 50 parties on the ballot paper, and this will just be another opponent on the political spectrum. And it's not that easy to just start these new parties, particularly if they rely on personalities. And I think that, you know, that's why parties have to be bigger than personalities. They've got to be about principles and ideas, not personalities. You see what happens when parties are personality politics. When there's a problem with the leader, then they walk away, the party collapses. You look at what's happened with things like COPE when Shalowa walked out. You look at what happens with the ID. You look at what happens with GOOD. So you've got these small parties. All right, you win 2 seats in Parliament. You can speak every third day in Parliament for 2 minutes. What impact are you going to make? So no matter what people say about the DA not being the vehicle, I disagree with it fundamentally. I think we're the only viable vehicle to build the core of the non-racial alternative to the ANC in South Africa. And so I think that we should be strengthening and adding to the DA and not simply weakening it. But, you know, people have freedom of choice in South Africa and freedom of political association. So if people want to form political parties, good luck to them. That's their job. My job is to grow this party and to ensure that we stay on track, that we get battle ready for 2021 and we be able to put in a good showing there.
The one conversation I'm tired of having is about race, as far as the DA is concerned, because I, as a black female South African, have very strong views about what the issue is and what needs to be done. The one thing I'm not finding from the DA, and that's why we keep going back in circles. If you pay attention to journalists, I listened yesterday, pretty much everyone asked you around this race question, and we keep going round in circles because the DA is inconsistent, you know. We have you yesterday saying, yes, we need redress. We need to be cognizant of it. We need to understand that, as the stats are showing us, the poorest in this country are black people. We need to recognize those things. You're speaking now about being a liberal and how you can't ignore the state of South Africa and the impact of apartheid in South Africa. But we keep going back and forth, John, because you're not all speaking from the same hymn sheet. We are struggling with consistent messaging around race from the DA.
Sure, yeah. No, I think it's a very, very fair criticism, and I think that's one of the reasons why I described this big blue wobbly jelly, the DA. People look at it and don't really know what is. It wobbles to the left and the right, and no one really knows where it stands. So it's important that the policy conference puts a final decision on this thing. But what cannot be denied is that in the adoption of the report of after the election, Chapter 6 particularly sets out very clearly where we stand on race and what our approach to race and redress should be. And I've been consistent. Anyone who tells you that race doesn't matter in South Africa is frankly not living in the real world. And race matters precisely because the majority of people, 99.9% of people who are poor in South Africa, are black South Africans. There's only around about 30,000 white South Africans who would even qualify on the definition of poor. So of course, race matters. But I don't believe that race-based policies, as we've seen over the course of the last 25 years, are the solution to resolving those, because you then create a situation where elite capture of those redress processes happen, and you've seen it with BEE. Even the ANC are starting to backtrack. If you listen to Minister Patel and even the President talking about how it's made people lazy in South Africa, that it's not working. We've got to come up with an alternative empowerment model. I don't believe that you need to resort to slavish racial categorization to resolve and uplift poor black South Africans, because if you target policies at the poor in South Africa who fall in that definition, 99.9% of the beneficiaries are going to be black South Africans anyway. How
do you navigate this space? How do you influence that view at the DA's policy conference? Because what we do know, in me saying it's inconsistent, that there are people saying, actually, scrap the whole thing. We should not be focusing on race at all. It doesn't matter. It's just a sideshow. It's people yapping, as some have described it. How do you then influence that view in the policy conference as John, the leader?
Well, I'm going to put my view very clearly on the table. I said very explicitly to the Federal Council yesterday that one of the things you can expect from me as a leader is that I'm going to shoot straight, and you're going to know what's on my mind and where I stand on matters. And that is going to be consistent across all audiences and in all conversations. So this is my view. I think that things have failed in South Africa. We can do better as a country, and we've got to do better, because the longer that we lock people out of opportunity and we lock people in poverty, the more of a fertile ground we create for our opponents, who have a very easy argument to make. You just simply find people who don't look like you or don't speak like you, and you turn them into the enemy, and you use hate and division as a tool to do so. Our job's a lot harder if we're going to build that non-racial alternative to the ANC, to make the case that yes, race matters, but resolving and resorting to the same race-based policies that have let South Africa down, and are the very reason we sit with the problems of inequality and exclusion today, are never going to be able to resolve those problems. But if we focus on opportunity policies and redress policies that are focused where they're needed, we'll be able to lift people out of poverty in years, not in generations. And we don't have the time. We're on a burning platform in South Africa. Frustration is growing, anger is growing, resentment is growing. The insiders are shrinking, the outsiders are growing, and that is a recipe for massive socio-economic problems for the country going forward. So, the centre, and I talk about the centre being the DA and the ANC, better wake up quickly, because we're going to create fertile ground for the radicals on the left and right of politics to be able to get a grip, and then we're going to see problems in South Africa going forward.
There's so much more I want to discuss there, but let me leave it for now. I want to look at the state of the organization.
Sure.
You know, you're saying you told them at Federal Council that you'll shoot straight. Where do you stand? Because also right there within the DA is an argument about whether to be progressive or to return to the classic liberal view. Where does John stand? If I, as a journalist, I'm trying to place you, as a South African, I'm trying to place you about the direction.
Sure.
You speak often actually leaning on both. From time to time, I go, okay, that sounds like a classical liberal speaking to me. That sounds like somebody who's progressive. Makashule Ghana, who lost in this race against you, speaks a lot about an African liberal. Where does John stand?
Well, I am a liberal Democrat at the core of it, but I'm certainly not a proponent of living in John Locke 17th century England. We don't live there. We're living in 21st century South Africa. And if one looks at the abiding sort of dynamic of liberalism, and its best thing is that it's been able to adapt over the centuries to the prevailing conditions at the time. So I think trying to implant a John Stuart Mills or John Locke approach in South Africa is going to be deaf and blind to the context in which we're in. And so I think that liberalism actually, in a society like South Africa, which recognizes individuals over groups, which recognizes that people are free to practice the culture, religions, and languages that they want, and those should all be equally defended, are in fact the only way South Africa is ever going to be governed. Because if it just becomes a race between competing nationalities and tribes or groups, we're never going to be able to achieve the cohesiveness that we need as a nation to take us forward. I believe that the liberal democratic view is the right one, but it means we've got to be modern, progressive, and compassionate. So I don't believe in hard-ass, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, no role whatsoever for the state liberalism. I believe the state is an actor in our economy, but the state must know its place in that particular environment. I believe that we need social safety nets, particularly in an environment like South Africa, which is why we support social grants and helping people there, but they can never be a substitute for the opportunity policies. They can never be a substitute for a growing economy, a quality education, quality healthcare that enables the individual the ability and platform to express themselves and grow themselves and expand as individuals.
When Helen Zille was elected Federal Council Chair, coming back from, her resignation from politics and leadership in the DA, what we knew and understood as journalists is, Mmusi's going to have a tough time working alongside Helen Zille. Now Mmusi's no longer part of the equation, you are. You've had a fair amount of clashes. What are your thoughts about having to work alongside Helen now and how to do it?
Yeah, well, look, I think that if everybody sticks to their knitting in the party, I think that we'll get along just fine. I think that there are roles. We're a party that's a constitutional party. It's made up of institutions and office bearers and roles. There are 18 key deliverables of that particular office, and it must get on and do it. Helen is not the leader of the party. She's occupying a position that James Self had for many, many years. And James stuck to his knitting and did what needed to be done and let the leader get on with leading. So I want to be very clear. I'm not a handbag carrier for Helen Zille. I'm my own man. And wherever I've led, whether it's been in the Durban City Council, in the KZN legislature, or in Parliament, I've led in my own way and with my own sense of conviction. And that's going to continue. I'm the elected leader of the DA, interim for now, hopefully permanently after May next year. And I'm going to lead the DA in my own way and in a way which I believe is going to grow the organization, build strong teams, and create a consensus and an environment in which we can have honest conversations within the party without having to speak to each other through the media or through Twitter and Facebook. We must be able to create those spaces where we can discuss ideas and discuss policies in a way that doesn't end up in a zero-sum game where you have winners and losers. I think that we can find consensus on many of the key issues because every member of the party, whether it's a Makashule Ghana or whether it's a John Steenhuisen, has to subscribe to the principles, the foundational principles of the party, which are liberal democratic in nature.
Well, your very first test feels like Gwenya, doesn't it? To us as outsiders, it looks like there's an impasse around Gwenya, with Helen pretty much already appointing and bringing on board, and federal council saying actually no, and people questioning the spirit that she left in, questioning the character, and how polarizing someone like Gwen Ngwenya is. How do you, what is the resolution? How do you navigate that space as the leader, as the face of the DA? Because we are looking at you as outsiders going, yeah, there's something about Gwen and the way she left. And if she comes back the way she was expected to come back, it says a lot about the DA and what's actually going to happen.
Sure.
You're not a handbag carrier. How are you going to navigate this issue?
Well, look, I mean, I think that it is staff appointments, and remember, this is an HR position. It's not sending Gwen back to Parliament. It's not her getting elected into any position. It is a pure, straight up and down HR position, and those are very seldom prosecuted in the Federal Council or the Federal Executive. In fact, Gwen's original appointment was at the whim of the leader and the chairperson of the Federal Council, and that was her reporting line. Mmusi just simply made the announcement to the Federal Executive that she had been appointed. I've been very insistent that I don't think that Gwen should be an MP and a head of policy, and that if she is going to come back, she cannot be fish or fowl, and that if she is going to be head of policy, she must be the head of policy and not be confusing and blurring her roles, which I think was a cause of a lot of the problem in her last tenure. Yes, she resigned under, I think, very unfortunate circumstances, but I think people are missing something, that she then thereafter went through an internal party process of electoral colleges and selection panel and came out into an electable position on the party's lists. And she could have returned back to Parliament if she wanted to, because she was at the top of that list. She chose at the time not to take up her seat. So if there was any defect or foundational defect in Gwen Ngwenya, I think she would have been weeded out in that process. She wasn't. She was in a highly electable position. I think that we've got a very short time frame ahead of the Federal Council policy, the Federal Policy Conference.
Yeah.
We've got, December's basically a write-off. Then you've got to start in January. We've got policies that need to be workshopped. There have got to be commissions. There's got to be the consultation process with the branches, activists and structures, the feedback, and then culminating in that final policy conference. And so Gwen had already started a lot of work, 13 policies, 7 of which had been completed. I just think that it makes sense in the current environment that she be brought back in, even if it's just on a short-term basis, to finalise this process and go forward. But Helen has now said that it's going to be a matter for discussion at the Federal Executive. We will have that discussion at the Federal Executive. But I think Gwen's one of those Marmite politicians. You either like or you don't like her. But I don't think anybody can doubt her capacity and capability and the intellect. I think if we have to go through an advertisement process, if we have to go out and cast the net wider, it's going to put another month onto the process. What I don't want in the party is a rush job around the policy, because then we're going to leave that policy conference with the same problems that we had going into it. It must be a final opportunity for us to put a compelling alternative offer to the people of South Africa. It can't be an ongoing street battle going into the 2021 elections, because we're going to switch off voters even more. I think people are already tired of the squabbling within the DA and public overflow of that. They want to see a party fighting for them, not fighting each other. And so, look, I think the matter will be resolved. But to my mind, it's a straight up and down HR matter, and it should have been dealt with that way. But nonetheless, there's been a decision by Helen to let's have a discussion at the Federal Executive about it. That discussion will take place, and I'll live with the outcome of it. I believe that when decisions are made, we respect those decisions and we go out and defend them.
The other issue the DA has is the Institute of Race Relations. It seems to, I love your facial expression right there. It seems to find its way into DA politics and to try and influence the direction of the party from the outside. Mmusi had been very adamant that he didn't want that relationship to continue, didn't want the IRRs involved in DA matters. Where do you stand? And I know you've clashed with them as well. Yeah. I
just think it's unfortunate when you have institutes like that interfering in the internal politics and picking winners and losers. No problem with people forming an institute, but you must choose whether you're a political party or whether you are a foundation or
but the proximity it also has to your leaders. Yeah. You can't also then erase the fact that it's got way too close ties to some in the DA, and then with that in mind, you then can't remove from the equation that what it's saying is actually what's being thought of by people within the DA. So it's acting as a mouthpiece for some within the movement, the organization.
I just think that we need to be our own organization. And yes, I mean, I think it's important that we listen and take the temperature from a variety of institutions in South Africa across the spectrum. So, I mean, I think the CDE offer us some value insight on how we can get the economy working again. And we must, in the development of our policy, be listening to all these voices. But I get annoyed when people start to pick winners and losers within political parties and then use your institute to position around it. I think it diminishes the institution's credibility going forward. And I think that the way in which this particular matter was handled by the IR, I think has been immature and unhelpful to them. Using, when you're challenged on what you've done and you start responding with memes, etc., I think it shows a level of debate that I don't think that we need. And again, you know, my job is to lead the DA. I'm not a member of the IRR. I'm a DA member. I'm the leader of the DA. And it's my job to defend, protect, and promote my organization. And I'm going to continue to do that against all comers, you know, whether it's the IRR or others.
I'm winding down now. I must ask you about the twin tasks that you're going to have.
Sure.
You've got the job of being interim leader, and that comes with a parliamentary role, I understand. But you also have the job of convincing DA delegates who are going to be sitting in that Congress eventually in May to actually put a stamp on you and make you the leader, not interim leader.
Sure. Yeah, of course. It's going to be I'm going to have my hands full. You know, there's huge responsibilities. In fact, there's 3 hats. You've got to pull the organisation right and get it right. I've got to make sure that we keep on the front foot in Parliament, where I think we've done rather well. And then thirdly, I've got a campaign to run to, you know, to get to win out in May. I mean, I don't want to have done all of this only to, you know, be booted out in May. I want to take and lead the party into the local government elections, and the foundations that I want to lay in the next 6 months, I want to be the foundations that the party will build on heading into that election. So yes, I'm going to be busy, but you know, I'm up for it.
Are you saying you're up for it?
I'm up for it.
Because I'm complaining that I don't have any more 2019 left in me. You got it?
As you see on my Twitter bio, I'm a street fighter for democracy. I'm going to be out on those streets doing all those things and using Parliament actually as a platform to set clearly the alternative. I think this tit for tat in Parliament isn't helpful. And you know, I think we had a great exchange with the President and the last President's questions, particularly on the question of land reform, where I put forward a very workable alternative using the Rakatse case and said to the President, well, why don't you, here's a suggestion for you, why don't you scrap this ridiculous new regulation that makes it difficult for land tenants to purchase the property they're on. And you know, I think it caught the President slightly off guard, because all he could say was, yes, I think it's a good idea and it must be included. And I think we need to be doing more of that in Parliament, is setting out alternatives and solutions to the problems, rather than just simply saying, well, you're a bunch of rotten, corrupt people who can't get anything right. I think that people want to hear us putting solutions on them, and they want to see us standing up for the issues that matter most to them. I said to somebody the other day, Parliament has spent the last month doing what are called BRRR reports. If you were to leave the studios and ask 10 South Africans what a BRRR report is, I don't think one of them will be able to tell you.
Yeah, they wouldn't.
Let's use Parliament to show people how we can build houses, how we can get people back to work, how we can fix the economy and do the things that matter most to them, making Parliament relevant and rooting it with that organic authenticity that the DA needs to develop if it's going to win over the trust of people.
And answering things like the land question, as many are waiting for. This is my parting shot to you.
Sure.
You know, when your name came up on the feeds on social media, we spoke about Twitter earlier and how horrible it can be. But when your name came up, a lot of people kept saying, "Oh yeah, he blocked us, and all of them going back to the issue of, "Oh, he's just a mediocre white man with a metric." You know, I just want you to also address that. You know,
Sure.
because that is the truth. You are a white man with a metric and not a lot
I hope
more.
you're not saying
And
mediocre.
then, hold on. I'll reserve my thoughts on mediocre, John. But part of the issue is, as a young black female, as I was pointing out earlier, we need to work 3 times as hard almost to even be worthy of a consideration of something along those lines. And that's what's irked people even on social media. Just your response to that argument and that view of you.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, I'm not sitting here trying to head up the SABC or to, you know, or to lead a government corporation. I'm here as a member of Parliament and as a public representative, and the constitutional frameworks were very clear that we don't have a qualified franchise in South Africa, and that's precisely to ensure that you get genuine people who represent the people of South Africa. 89% of South Africans do not have tertiary education, and that is the truth of the matter. Are we to say to them that, well, you're locked out of opportunity just because you don't have tertiary education? I've worked hard, and I'm not saying that I fully accept that I have had opportunities and privileges that other people have not had. I have no choice in that. What I do have a choice is to use my talents and to use what I've gained and the experience I've got to uplift the lives of others and to fight for a better future for them and for their children. I can do that. My parting shot on this is simply this as well. You don't need a tertiary education to be a good public representative and a good steward of the public finances. And those poor pensioners at VBS who had their life savings looted sleep no better at night knowing that the people who stole from them have PhDs and master's degrees. What people need is honest South Africans who are willing to put their hands up and say, I want to serve, I want to make a difference, and that's what I want to do. And I want to be judged not on the color of my skin or the fact that I happen to have a matric certificate. I want to be judged on my contribution. Make your choice on that and make your decision about me on that. But give me a chance to prove myself.
All right, you did apparently also unblock many people, John, that you blocked on Twitter.
I only block people who use derogatory racial terms and epithets in their arguments. I'm happy to debate anybody. I'm no stranger to Twitter tours with people.
Yes.
No stranger to I'm happy to debate. But when you resort to reducing my argument to the fact that I happen to be white or use derogatory language, I don't want to engage with you anymore. Will you tell me to shut up, Steenhuisen? I'm going to shut up, and I'll get off your Twitter timeline.
And completely
no problem.
remove myself. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much. That's the newly elected interim leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, who just joined us in the studio here at News 24, talking about, his election, his plans for the future, and how to get the DA on the right track, at least in the voters' eyes, in the lead up to the 2021 local government elections. For News 24, my name is Tshidi Madia.